when it comes to the image of a Hollywood Southern outlaw. Few actors fit the bill better than Woody Harrelson. However, his roles might have called back a little closer to home, as a very real killer cast a shadow over his family's history. His father, the infamous hitman, Charles V. Harrelson. Charles Void Harrelson was born on July 23, 1938, a birthday he would later share with his son, Woody. He spent his childhood growing up on his father's farm in Lovelady, Texas. Ironically, most of his family were in law enforcement, his brother Claude being a police officer and later private investigator, and many of his uncles and cousins working security at the nearby Eastham prison facility. Charles, known as Charlie or Chuck to his family and friends, only partially finished high school and instead shipped out to join the U.S. Navy in 1956. Despite his humble background, Charles was well known for his intelligence and charismatic personality, his son Woody having once stated, "This might sound odd to say about a convicted felon, but my father is one of the most articulate, well-read, charming people I've ever known." Upon his return from the Navy, he married Diane Lou Oswald after just 2 weeks of knowing each other, and the couple had 3 sons together, Jordan, Woodrow, and Brett. They later divorced in 1964, leaving Diane to raise the 3 boys on her own. Charles Harrelson started out as a traveling encyclopedia salesman. He was later employed as a technician for a dental supply company, which he would often use as a cover when on the job as a contract killer. Even from his humble beginnings, Charles Harrelson was born to take risks. He learned how to rig card games from as young as 12 years old, and he found out he had a natural talent at cheating people out of their money. He went on to find success as a professional gambler, which began a slippery slope into riskier endeavors. To settle his mounting debts, he began experimenting with more illegal streams of income. His first arrest was a charge for armed robbery in 1960, but he was able to walk away from a lengthy sentence. Although this would be his first brush with the law, it would be far from the last. In 1968, Charles Harrelson was charged with the murder of carpet salesman Alan Harry Berg. He was hired by a man named Frank DeMaria, who was previously employed by the Berg family but was fired for stealing money from the business and ultimately decided to start his own carpet business. This rivalry led DeMaria to hire Charles Harrelson to assassinate Berg for $1,500. Harrelson convinced his ex-girlfriend, Sandra Sue Hathaway, to lure Berg to a bar where he abducted him, drove him to a remote marsh, and shot him in the head. Finding Berg still alive, Harrelson strangled him with a rope and disposed of his body. It took 6 months for investigators to discover Berg's remains. In the months leading up to the discovery, Nat Berg, Alan's father, received a call from a private investigator claiming to know the identity of the killer and the whereabouts of his missing son. This investigator turned out to be Claude Harrelson, Charles's brother, who was acting as the middleman. Initially, Claude offered $3,000 for the information, but his asking price escalated over time to $5,000 and even $10,000. As the Berg family weighed their options, they received a call from Dennis Wiedock, a former employee of the Berg's carpet business. Wiedock proposed a $10,000 exchange for disclosing both the location of Alan's body and Charles Harrelson's potential whereabouts, to which the Berg family agreed. Wiedock gained this information as he was living with Sandra Sue Hathaway at the time, who later gave in to her guilt and took the stand against Harrelson in the trial. Unfortunately for Harrelson, Alan was the brother of prominent Houston attorney David Berg, and the Berg family were determined to find retribution. Fortune smiled on Harrelson when he found himself being represented by renowned criminal defense attorney Percy Foreman, whose clients included notorious criminals such as James Earl Ray and Jack Ruby. Foreman had the reputation of getting his clients off with even the most heinous crimes by any means necessary. He argued that Sandra Sue was Harrelson's common-law wife, which typically prevents spouses from testifying against each other, thus undermining her testimony. The defense was bolstered by 2 alibi witnesses, J.V. and Leon Price, a pair of respected siblings from Trinity, Texas. They testified that Harrelson sold them a horse at the time of Allen's murder, supported by a bill of sale with a specific time and date. Although there were allegations that the bill of sale was forged, the testimony of the Price brothers convinced the jury, leading to Harrelson's acquittal, and all charges against him were dropped in September of 1970. To this day, the Berg family remains outraged by the injustice following Harrelson's release, and Allen's brother David has since authored a book called Run Brother Run, recounting their family's tragedy. Though this seemed to be a close call for Charles, just a few months later, Harrelson would be connected to another murder. Around the same time of Allen Berg's assassination, Charles was in Hearne, Texas, doing business with a grain dealer named Pete Scamardo. In June 1968, Harrelson traveled to Kansas City to sell heroin smuggled by Scamardo from Mexico. Harrelson managed to dispose the drugs in a gutter before being detained by the police. After losing $5,000 of product, Harrelson owed Scamardo a favor. Seizing the opportunity, Scamardo offered Harrelson $2,000 to eliminate his business partner, Sam DeGelia. Each partner held a $150,000 life insurance policy on the other, and Scamardo was looking to cash in. DeGelia was later found dead with 2 gunshot wounds to the head on a farm in McAllen, Texas. Police traced their first lead back to Harrelson when they discovered checks cashed under the name of Charles Stuttenborough, which was one of Harrelson's known aliases. They then traced the abduction vehicle to one Jerry O'Brien Watkins, an associate of Harrelson's, who knew him under his alias. Watkins confessed that he had been coerced by Harrelson into accompanying him to what he thought was a grain deal, only for Harrelson to abduct and ultimately execute DeGelia. Harrelson then threatened Watkins and his wife into silence. Scamardo was found guilty as an accomplice to murder, but in the end got off easy with a sentence of 7 years probation without jail time. Percy Foreman would return to defend Harrelson, employing similar tactics as in the previous trial, presenting a surprise witness, nightclub singer Louise Scott Gannon, who testified to being with Harrelson at the time of the murder. Harrelson later spent 3 years in prison in Edinburgh, Texas, awaiting a retrial. Unfortunately for Harrelson, Gannon did not appear to stand for the retrial, possibly due to fear of perjury charges from her previous testimony. This absence of a defense witness sealed Harrelson's conviction, resulting in a 15-year prison sentence. However, he was released after just 5 years for good behavior. Little did he know, his luck was about to run out. On May 29, 1979, federal judge John H. Wood pulled out of his apartment complex, Chateau Dijon, on his way to the San Antonio courthouse when his wife Catherine complained about her car having a flat tire. While changing the flat, he was shot with a single high-caliber round to the back, killing him instantly. The murder of John Wood marked the first federal judge to be killed in U.S. history since John P. Slough in 1867, and kicked off one of the biggest manhunts in FBI history, costing them $12 million and 2 years to bring Wood's killer to justice. Nicknamed Maximum John for his reputation of punishing criminals with the longest possible prison sentences, Judge Wood had no shortage of people who wanted him dead. The FBI's top suspect was drug dealer Jimmy Chagra, who was arrested on a 5-count drug indictment in February of that same year, and whose trial under Wood was scheduled to take place just days after the judge's assassination. Chagra was one of the biggest drug traffickers in the United States at the time, said to have moved over 85% of the country's supply in the 70s and 80s, smuggling product from Colombia into the U.S. Jimmy's eldest brother, Lee, a prominent criminal defense attorney in El Paso, had shielded Jimmy from the law until Lee was killed in a suspected robbery on December 23, 1978. Following the elder Chagra's death, the FBI and DEA gained access to his files, gaining insight into Jimmy's drug operations. Jimmy was also a notorious gambler, and while attending the World Series of Poker in Las Vegas in 1979, made the acquaintance of a fellow card shark who was none other than Charles V. Harrelson. While no official transcript exists, reports indicate that Jimmy Chagra hired Harrelson for $200,000 to eliminate Judge Wood, potentially to avoid his impending trial and seek justice for his brother's murder. The FBI found themselves under intense pressure to solve one of the most significant assassinations of a government official since JFK. They soon presented Chris Lambros as a witness, a young lawyer living in the same apartment complex as Wood. Lambros had bumped into a suspicious man in the stairwell just an hour before the assassination. Upon learning of Judge Wood's death, Lambros promptly contacted the FBI to report the encounter. During questioning, Lambros was hypnotized in an attempt to enhance her recollection of that morning. The use of hypnotically induced testimony is typically considered controversial, unreliable, and inadmissible in court due to concerns about its suggestibility and inability to be cross-examined. A pivotal piece of evidence in the assassination of John Wood included the stock of a Weatherby .243 rifle found in a marsh. Initially registered under the alias Faye L. King, the FBI traced the gun's bill of sale to match the fingerprints and handwriting to Charles Harrelson's second wife, Joanne Starr. Criminal attorney Joe Chagra, youngest of the Chagra siblings, provided the tip, claiming Harrelson had given him a map detailing where he disposed of the murder weapon. Harrelson, however, claimed it was merely a scheme to extort money from the Chagra brothers for information. In late August of 1980, following a cocaine-fueled rager, Harrelson wrote his last will in a Houston motel, in which he stated that he never actually killed Judge Wood. He later confided to his attorney in a recorded conversation that he merely took the fall for the assassination to secure financial support for his sons under a secret deal made with the Chagra brothers. 2 days later, still under drug-induced paranoia, Harrelson fired at his car's muffler in Van Horn, Texas, leaving him stranded by the roadside. A course of events led to Harrelson finding himself in a 6-hour standoff with the police. It was at this time that Harrelson admitted not only to the murder of Judge Wood, but also to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. However, he only said this to try and delay his arrest and save his own life. Following his detention at Harris County Jail, the FBI wiretapped private conversations between Harrelson and his defense lawyer, as well as his stepdaughter Teresa Starr, with whom he had also been having an affair with. Harrelson directed Teresa to handle large sums of money and engaged in secretive transactions with another liaison, later identified as Jimmy Chagra's wife. On November 20, 1980, Harrelson was placed in a police lineup where Chris Lambros positively identified him as the man she saw shortly before Judge Wood's murder. On April 15, 1982, Charles Harrelson, Joanne Starr, Jimmy Chagra, Joe Chagra, and Liz Chagra were indicted for conspiracy to murder Judge Wood. Jimmy received a 21-year sentence for prior drug charges, but was acquitted of his involvement in the judge's assassination. Harrelson, on the other hand, received 2 consecutive life sentences. In 2003, Jimmy Chagra recanted his previous admission, stating that someone other than Harrelson had pulled the trigger during the Judge Wood assassination. According to informant and fellow criminal associate Robert Riojas, the real murderer was a man named Larry Culbreth, and that the hit was put out by his criminal defense lawyer, Alan Brown. This theory aligns with the statement Harrelson made to his defense lawyer, claiming that Brown had repeatedly urged him to handle a Weatherby .243 rifle just days before Judge Wood's murder, the same type of rifle identified as the murder weapon. In a more unexpected conspiracy, actor Matthew McConaughey had hinted at a possible connection to Charles Harrelson. McConaughey speculated that his mother might have been romantically involved with Harrelson in the late 60s, shortly before McConaughey was born, raising suspicions that Charles could be his biological father. As a close friend of his True Detective co-star Woody Harrelson, the two have discussed taking a DNA test to prove their suspicions, though McConaughey was more reluctant to explore the possibility. Harrelson's sons, Jordan, Woody, and Brett, only had brief encounters with their father growing up. only on the rare occasions when he was not in prison or not running from the law. They managed to reconnect with him as adults during their visits to prison and tried to appeal for a retrial of their father's case in the 90s with little success.
Well, he is in prison right now for the killing of a federal judge. I think that it was not a fair trial, especially because the guy who supposedly hired my father to commit the murder was later acquitted on a retrial.
Woody, do you think your father is innocent of that second murder? That's what I've heard.
I'm not saying my father's a saint, but I think he's innocent of that, yeah.
Are you trying to have the case opened up, trying to have it investigated, trying to set him free?
Well, let's put it this way, I haven't given up hope.
As a man who spent half his life behind bars, Charles Harrelson seemed to have no issues with living out his sentence in the comfort of his cell. However, after 13 years of incarceration, Charles Harrelson attempted a daring escape from the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary with two fellow inmates using a makeshift rope to scale the walls. The three were ultimately caught, however, leading to Harrelson's transfer to the ADX Florence Supermax prison in Colorado, known for housing the most dangerous inmates in the United States. Harrelson embraced his notoriety and relished his reputation within the prison. Harrelson passed away in solitude in his cell at the age of 68. His stint in Supermax did little to dampen his spirits. In fact, he later expressed his contentment in a letter to a friend, stating, "The silence is wonderful, and feeling left alone is great. Nobody bothers me. I have my family and friends. I still have a relatively intact mind. It could be infinitely worse." Reflecting on his life's work, Harrelson wrote the following line in his will, penned nearly 27 years earlier in a Houston motel, a line that ultimately encapsulated his philosophy in life. "Since death is certain, I should only be credited with speeding up a natural process."